As a huge sci-fi nerd and an astroengineering enjoyer, the thought of generation ships and wormholes and space elevators and time loops and all of that are just the butter on my toast. So, when confronted with a game about a colony started by sending a generation ship through a wormhole to colonize an alien planet filled with mysteries and dangers, I was certainly interested. And then, after finding out that the gameplay is a life sim with a large deck-building system with very strong narrative choices that actually change what happens in the game, and that when you can finish the game, you can start another run with this time-loopy sort of hand-wavium that actually affects the next run, it was enticing enough for me to even put up with the dating sim aspects. But now the hard part. I'm going to try and talk about the game without spoiling any of the narrative choices. I'll do my best, folks. Here we go. In I Was a Teenage Exocolonist, you start out by creating your character, choosing your gender and pronouns, genetic modification, and best friend. But since the artwork changes throughout the game and is intrinsic to the cards, no matter what else you choose, you get the same character model. So, at least you don't spend an hour crafting the perfect face and hairstyle and body to look like, I don't know, Benedict Cumberface. But then the game starts telling the tale of the stratospheric and its ill-fated landing on the planet. Right out of the gate, they introduce the idea that you have memories of a time set in the future, that you can almost know sometimes what's about to happen. But you're a kid, so you ignore it and go out to play. Now the gameplay begins in earnest. You'll be able to run around each month and choose who to talk to. You'll be able to collect ground goodies, and eventually you'll want to decide what to focus on for the whole month. As though a 10-year-old will be able to do one thing for a whole month. But there are 12 skills to learn in 3 suits: social in yellow, mental in blue, and physical in red. Each of these will grant you access to new events or actions if they're high enough, and will award new perks 3 times each when you rank them up to these little bubbly things here. Also, after you use a specific action for a while, it might open up new events or other actions along its tech tree, etc. There's also a kudos money system that you can gain through your actions, and a bucket of other kids that you can gain friendship with over time, and that in itself will open up new options, new choices, branching storylines, and whole endings of the game are locked behind which friendships with individual people you choose to pursue. And you can also flirt with, romance, and marry any of these friends. But to progress time, you'll need to choose one thing to do for the month. And you might get a story event, which might grant you some game-changing choices, or free points in a skill, or friendship points, or new cards, or whatever. But with every activity, you also face a card challenge. This is a simple mechanic that you can skip or even make harder as you so choose, but it's a surprisingly compelling hand-building game, where you use your memories to create pairs of numbers, or straights, or large groups of the same color, etc. But as you gain more cards, you'll find plenty that adjust the cards around them. Or a specific challenge will lock one card in the line, or adjust the color or number of whatever you place there. But if you meet the challenge number, you'll succeed at the challenge and gain the listed rewards. You can even blow that number out of the water and reach a higher goal that grants extra rewards. Some challenges are extended by a few rounds, and you'll have to reach an even higher goal with progressively more card slots available, but these usually have far better rewards. And all through the game, you can gain new cards by your successes or even failures, or through the story, or by gifts. These cards represent memories, things that have happened in your life, and they can be augmented by gear that you found, or bought, or have been given, and individual cards can be adjusted on the fly by consumable items that you found. Like I said, it's slightly complex, but very compelling. As the game progresses, you'll go from an even deck of the 3 colors with 0s, 1s, and 2s, but by the time the endgame rolls around, you'll likely have specialized into 1 or 2 colors, with 6s, 8s, even 11s, or cards with gems that adjust or adjusted by other cards, wild cards, and cards with special powers. You'll also be able to forget memories every time you fill the stress meter and need to spend a month resting. Oh yes, there's a stress meter that requires you rest occasionally. At the start of each year, you'll have your birthday and grow a year older, and as the years roll by, you and your friends' character models will change twice. Once into teenagers and once into their final adult forms. Then, after your 20th birthday, the game will end, and you'll face the consequences of your choices. I'll do my best to avoid spoilers here, but I do have to touch on the plot of the game to explain the real strength of this game. It's important also to know that this is not a game for children. It even starts with a long list of trigger warnings that are very true. The game doesn't shy away from sensitive topics or disturbing events. It can kill your favorite friend or have them turn on you if you make the wrong choices, or the morally right ones. You could find yourself as an orphan, or a rebel, or a pariah, or you can lead your friends to their doom, or you can save the colony from disaster, or commit genocide, or you can find the cure to disease, or loose a plague that destroys the entire planet. Your choices make all the difference. There are about 30 possible endings available in the game, and along the way, you'll be given options that seem like the best options, but will lead to loyalties that might end in disaster later on. The game is very good at foreshadowing the possible outcomes to your choices, so there wasn't a place that we found where the game was asking us if we'd like to eat a pie, only to find that it causes our friends to die. At least, not without a long explanation that the pie was made with questionable ingredients, and even an argument about whether you should feed it to the children. And though there were a few times that I personally didn't like how a passage or bit of dialogue was written, I really can't say that any of it was truly poorly written, especially in light of the rest of the great writing that makes the characters come to life and change and morph in interesting ways, and sometimes die in very convincing ways. The writing never felt contrived or strained, and though I didn't really get the ending I wanted the first time around, it was the one where I killed the planet and died as a divorced orphan, I did get the ending that I chose, and it wasn't an unexpected conclusion to that particular run. And then when I started another run, I was able to keep many of the memories, not the cards, but the memories. It's a time loop, remember, so that I could save a bunch of the people that died in the first run and got a radically different ending. Overall, the writing and plot are way over on the compelling end of the spectrum rather than on the contrived end. I would argue that the 7-hour first run I had of the game was not really playing the game to the end, just ending a single run. So is the true finish of the game playing it until you have all 30 endings? And since the game relies so heavily on your choices to feed you story beats, it's unlikely that you'll soon find the same story without choosing it directly. You can and should focus on a single color of skills for the first few years and branch out to a second in the mid-game, picking up a few levels in the third before the game ends. In most of my runs, I was able to max out a handful of skills and get 2 perks in another handful, but always ended the game with at least 1 perk in each skill. But since some of the important choices happen in the early game, you're likely to lock yourself out of at least some of the endings in the first year or two, since you'll just not have all the skills needed to get to those other endings. You could do a full blue run once, building relationships with Tan or Cal, or do a red run with Mars and Nem as friends. Or you can go full yellow and try to befriend everyone at least a little, or try mixing 2 of the colors and choosing a best friend that doesn't complement those colors. Or choose all equally and see if failing everything brings an interesting outcome. And if the default card play stops becoming compelling, you can switch to hard mode, or turn it off completely to breeze through a few runs. Easily a game with 70 hours of solid storytelling gameplay in my estimation. I'm certainly well on my way to those numbers. The game does suffer a little bit in the later parts of some runs, if you haven't opened up enough of the basic action options, but have fully finished several full skill colors, getting any progress might be quite slow for a few years of in-game time, and you might run out of things that you really want to achieve on that particular run. So, just looking for various endings. But the question that we like to ask around here is not, should we replay it, but should a Christian play it at all? Right out of the gate, we trip over an issue that will be a problem for many. In the character selection, you are requested to select your gender, which by itself isn't a problem, but it's not a female-male checkbox, but a slider to show how heavily masculine or feminine you are. And you're given the option of different pronouns, and told that your character model won't look any different until later in the teen years, which in itself is understandable given that it's got lots of life and dating sim elements, and that's very common in modern dating sims. But they go further with the gender fluidity by introducing characters that are blatantly non-binary, using the hand-waving excuse that in the future you'll be able to gene engineer yourselves to be whatever you want on the fly. And they even raise the question again during the character's puberty, asking again what gender you are and allowing you to change it. And it's not really surprising that they added this, as the world is more and more ignoring both the biblical teaching that there are only two genders, but they're also ignoring the biological teaching that would make it impossible, or at least very excruciatingly painful and entirely transformative to actually become the other gender. The differences go way further than a few organs, but in a modern dating sim, players are gonna expect that you can play as whatever gender you want and can fantasize about whatever kind of relationship you want. Which brings us to the next topic. Throughout the game, you can befriend any of the kids, which is great, but the expectation is that when they grow up, you'll marry or at least start sleeping with one or more of them. And there are no distinctions and nothing stopping you from dating any of them. You can create a masculine or feminine character and romantically go after any of your peers. Fortunately, it is ultimately your choice as a character, so as long as you don't pursue it, you should be fine. But be aware that the game does not distinguish between you leveling friendship with your best bud and you leveling friendship with your crush, sweetheart, romantic interest. You could hang out with your best dude and have the game offer you to flirt with him. Or the game could offer you an option that you could flirt with a teacher or officer. It will always offer other options too, but it is what it is. Now, for the non-Christians that might be watching, let me say I fully believe that it is a sin to commit homosexuality. The Bible is very clear on that. But it's also equally sinful to commit adultery or any other sexual act outside of God's design for marriage. Not because sex is sinful or horrible or bad, but because sex is sacred. It's intended to be enjoyed, and it pleases God. There's an entire book of the Bible that is, not to put too fine a point on it, erotic poetry. So please understand that we're aghast at promiscuity, not from a prudish fear of sex, but from a disgust of something sacred and blessed being defiled. And for all the Christians in the room, please, if you're guilty of this, stop hating the sinner. They are no worse than you. Their sin of promiscuity is no greater a failing in the eyes of God than your pride or lies or theft or selfishness. So love the sinner and remember that Christ himself said that he was not come to save the righteous, but the sinner. He ate with publicans and prostitutes. So get out there and stop being afraid of sinners, but be afraid for them and tell them of the love that they're searching for and can't find in the world. They can only find it in Christ. Anyway, off my pulpit. As mentioned, there is a fair amount of sexuality in the game. Not any nudity that I found, or even terribly revealing clothes, except for one fellow that figured a pair of sleeves was enough and he didn't need the torso part of his shirt. And they do a decent job of fading to black before anything goes too far. But they make it very plain that these two are making out and then sleeping together, or running off behind the barn for a while. There's lots of flirting and suggestions and fairly candid talk of puberty. For all the dating sim trappings, it's very much an early 20s teen drama level of sexuality and sexual tension in the mid to late game. In this area, I can see that some Christians might be wary of some of the topics being discussed. But surprisingly, I was found that I was always able to choose the option that I found morally right. The game recognized that as a fair place to stand, be it eugenics, genocide, nuclear family, self-defense, pacifism, vegetarianism, or even rebellion against authority. The writing was strong enough that at one point I called my best friend a coward, and he and I came to an understanding and went on. But the game remembered that and responded to it. I've reviewed games that set the biblical stance on any given topic in a distinctly bad light, and other than gender fluidity, this is not one of those. Alright, it's rapid-fire roundup time. For a game involving this much death and anger and sexual tension, the writers did a great job of avoiding real-world swearing. There were a few here and there, but many of the swears were made-up deities to curse at. There are a few times that alcohol and drugs were introduced in the game, and one time that I found that the entire teen population was accidentally drugged without anybody knowing about it until the scientists did some more testing on those beans. So that was fun, but it wasn't very common. And finally, the music is lovely and fits the game well, and I can't say anything bad against it. So, that's I Was a Teenage Exocolonist. Not a game I can recommend to most people, but as always, whether you play it or not is between you and God. I won't judge you, and nobody in the log pile will either. So, we'll leave it to you. If you have any other questions about specifics of the game or would like me to review another game, please let me know in the comments. And as always, I'll play with you again next time.